Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I transferred to this university halfway through my sophomore year, and by the time I hit my junior year, I'd settled into a pretty solid routine. Most of my classes were business courses, and I was doing well. Really well. My GPA was perfect, and I planned to keep it that way. Then came Business Information Systems. This class was different from everything else I'd taken. Most of us were business majors who'd never touched anything this technical before. The professor didn't sugarcoat it either. He told us on day one that half the class typically failed or dropped out. Looking around the room, I believed him. 40 students sat there looking increasingly nervous as he went through the syllabus. After the first week, people were already panicking. The material was dense. Database design, system architecture, technical specifications. None of it made sense to anyone. I heard complaints every single day before class started. But I wasn't about to let my GPA tank because of one hard class. I started grinding immediately. Every night I read the textbook cover to cover. I made flashcard sets online. I finished assignments a full week before they were due. I watched YouTube videos about concepts I didn't understand. I basically lived and breathed this material. About a month in, I was working on an assignment in one of the quiet study rooms on campus. Several other students from my class were there too, all hunched over their laptops. They looked miserable. One girl kept sighing loudly. Two guys were whispering frantically to each other, clearly stuck on something. Another student had his head in his hands. I was moving through the assignment pretty smoothly. All that studying was paying off. When I got up to grab some water from the fountain down the hall, one of the guys called out and asked if I could help him with question 3 when I got back. I told him sure, just give me a couple minutes. I walked down the hall, filled up my water bottle, checked my phone. Maybe 5 minutes total. When I came back to the study room, the entire atmosphere had changed. Everyone was typing away happily. The girl who'd been sighing was smiling. The two guys who'd been stuck were nodding at each other. Nobody looked stressed anymore. The guy who'd asked for help looked up and told me, never mind, he'd figured it out. But I'm not stupid. I knew exactly what had happened. They'd all copied my work off my screen while I was gone. Every single person in that room had their assignment open, and now suddenly they were all cruising through it. Right. What really annoyed me was what happened next. Over the following days, I noticed that nobody in class seemed to be struggling with that assignment anymore. Not just the people who'd been in the study room, almost everyone. Which meant whoever took my work had sent it to the entire class. I help people all the time. I tutored multiple classmates that semester alone, but this wasn't asking for help. This was stealing my work and then distributing it like some kind of assignment black market. So I decided to do something about it. For the next assignment, I intentionally changed one answer. Question 3 asked for net income, and the correct answer was $1,500. I changed mine to negative $1,500. Just multiplied by -1. Then I saved the file. The following week I went back to the same study room. Same time, same setup. I opened my laptop, pulled up my assignment with the wrong answer clearly visible, and waited. After about 20 minutes, I got up to get water again. When I came back, same thing. Everyone was suddenly making progress. The guy next to me was practically finished. I submitted my assignment later that day with the correct answer. Positive $1,500. A week later, when the professor handed back the assignments, I watched him pause at almost every desk. He'd set down a paper, and the student would frown or look confused. I got mine back. Full marks. The girl next to me got hers back, and I saw a big red circle around question 3 with a note that said, incorrect. After class, a bunch of students crowded around the professor's desk. One student says they didn't understand why so many people got question 3 wrong. The professor explained that the answer was $1,500, but many students had put negative $1,500. Another student argued that didn't make sense with the rest of the problem. The professor just said exactly, which pretty much confirmed he knew what was up. I hung back, waiting for everyone to leave. When the room finally cleared, the professor asked if I thought the class was too hard. I told him honestly that it was hard. But if people spent as much time studying as they do complaining, they'd be fine. He said he'd been thinking the same thing. I made a split-second decision. I told him I happened to know that most of the class copied my work on the last assignment. I explained that question 3 should have been positive $1,500, but I'd put down negative $1,500 initially. Everyone copied me, and then I changed it later. I said he could reasonably conclude that anyone with the negative answer had cheated off my incorrect work. The professor said he'd suspected they were copying each other, but didn't realize I was the source. He thanked me for being honest and for my dedication to the class. I don't know exactly what happened to everyone who copied, but I'm guessing it wasn't good. Either a 0 on the assignment or an academic integrity violation. Maybe both, but I wasn't done yet. The midterm was coming up, and our professor had mentioned something important during the first week. He said he wouldn't curve the test if anyone scored particularly well. Normally, he'd adjust the weight so that your score out of 50 counted, even though the test had 60 points available. But if someone scored high enough, that adjustment wouldn't happen. Nobody expected anyone to score above 75%. This class was brutal. Everyone was counting on that curve, so I decided I was going to destroy it. I studied harder than I'd ever studied for anything. I recruited one other student who hadn't been involved in the cheating. We met every day for 2 weeks before the exam. We went through practice problems, old quizzes, every single concept from the textbook. We made sure we knew this material inside and out. Test day arrived. I sat down, looked at the questions, and smiled. I knew this, all of it. I worked through every problem carefully, checked my answers twice, and finished before everyone else. I was the first person to turn in my exam. A week later, the professor started handing back tests. I watched him move through the rows. The scores were brutal: 68, 71, 70, 66, 75, 67. And these were the students who actually tried. Someone passed a test down my row. It landed on my desk. 93%. A student in the front row asked if there was going to be a curve. The professor said nope. I asked what the high score was. The professor announced it was 93%. The average was 71. A lot of people didn't hit the 70% they needed to pass. Maybe they made it up on the final. Maybe they didn't. Either way, I got exactly what I wanted. I walked out of the library with my burger in hand, already thinking about the ride home. That's when I noticed something was off. My bike wasn't where I left it. I stood there for a second, scanning the whole bike rack area. Nothing. Not a single mountain bike anywhere near where mine should have been. The burger, literally, started falling out my mouth when reality hit me. Someone had stolen my bike, with both locks still on it, in broad daylight, in the middle of the city. There was a security guard standing nearby, so I rushed over to him and asked if he'd seen anyone take a mountain bike from the rack. He told me straight up that my chances of getting it back were basically 0. He explained how thieves just cut through locks, throw bikes in trucks, and ship them off to Poland or somewhere else to sell. I could tell the guy had some weird thing against Polish people, but he seemed honest enough. He wasn't trying to give me false hope. I walked home instead of filing a police report. The whole way back, I kept thinking about how unfair it was. Part of me even considered just stealing someone else's bike to replace mine. But I didn't do it. I'm not that person. My bike had been expensive. A really solid mountain bike that I'd had for over 5 years. My neighbor had given it to me as a gift after his friend gave it to him. The neighbor never used it since he already had his own bike. The thing was built to last. And you didn't see bikes like that around my city very often. A whole month went by. I pretty much accepted that my bike was gone forever. Then it was my birthday, the 10th of December. That evening, my friend and I went to see the premiere of the last Hobbit movie. It was way better than the other two, in my opinion. After the movie ended, we rolled a joint and started walking home while smoking it. We turned a corner onto this usually quiet street, even though it's right next to an area with like 10 bars. That's when I saw something in the corner of my eye, a familiar shape. I stopped walking and stared at it. My bike, right there on the street, in all its glory. I recognized it immediately. all the scratches, the dents, the kinks in the frame that I'd caused over the years. But something was different. The thief had added a new light, a new seat, and new brakes. Actually, pretty nice upgrades. I told my friend that it was my bike. He asked if I was sure. I pointed out the exact scratch patterns and dents, telling him I knew every single mark on the thing. We decided to finish smoking first before calling the cops, but then I realized we had a massive problem. The bike was locked, and I had zero proof it was mine. I never got any paperwork when my neighbor gave it to me, and his friend who originally bought it had passed away. Without proof, the police couldn't do anything. I started freaking out a little. My friend pulled out his phone and called the police to explain the situation. They said they'd be there in 15 minutes since it wasn't urgent. Then my friend called his dad, who holds a really high position in the police force. My friend explained everything to his dad. I couldn't hear what was being said, but my friend's face lit up. He wouldn't tell me what the plan was, just kept saying everything would be fine. The police showed up right on time. We explained the whole situation. They believed me, especially when I showed them exactly where I'd scratched my name into the frame 5 years ago and described every single dent and scratch. But without pressing charges or having documentation, their hands were tied. That's when my friend smiled and laid out his plan. He suggested we put a lock on the bike right now and wait for whoever comes to claim it. He figured it would be sometime between midnight and 1 in the morning when the bars close. When the person showed up and couldn't unlock it, the cops could come around the corner and catch them. He explained that if they couldn't prove ownership, they either stole it or bought it from a thief, which was also illegal. The officers looked skeptical. My friend pulled out his phone, called his dad on video chat, and handed it to them. His dad showed his credentials and said he took full responsibility for the operation. The officers agreed. One of them told me to press charges online right then using my phone. I needed to report the frame number so I'd have legal proof the bike was mine. We put a lock on the bike and waited. Around 1:10 in the morning, this scrawny guy in a hoodie, jeans, and Nike Air Max came around the corner. He walked up to the bike, stopped halfway, then ran the rest of the way to it. He grabbed the new lock and started screaming and swearing in Polish. I recognized some of the words from playing online games with my Polish friends back in high school. The police officers came around the corner. The guy froze when he saw them. My friend and I walked over too. The officer asked what the problem was and why he was screaming. The guy said someone had locked his bike. The officer looked at him, then pointed at me and told him that was funny because I'd just reported my bike stolen and this looked exactly like mine. The guy insisted it was his and that he'd bought it. The officer asked for proof. The guy couldn't provide any. He had nothing. No receipt, no photos, no frame number, nothing. That's when I remembered I had old photos on my phone showing me with the bike, including clear shots of that specific dent. I showed the photos to the officers. They were convinced. They grabbed bolt cutters from their car and cut through the lock like it was butter. When they were putting the guy in the car, I walked over and looked right at him. I thanked him for the upgrades and told him he'd saved me a bunch of money on repairs. The officers thanked us for the interesting night and told us to call if we ever had another crazy situation like this. I said goodbye to my friend and promised to send his dad a thank you gift. When I rode my bike home, I couldn't stop smiling like an idiot, singing to myself about how I fought the law and actually won. Best birthday present ever. I moved to London in the mid-80s looking for work in theater production. The wages weren't great, but I managed to find a decent flat on the 8th floor of a tower block in southeast London. It wasn't fancy, but the view over the local park made up for the cramped kitchen and the dodgy heating system that only seemed to work when it felt like it. The building had 10 floors with 4 flats on each level, one at each corner. Most of the residents kept to themselves in that typical British way where you'd nod at someone in the lift but never start a conversation. It suited me fine. I worked long hours at the theater and didn't need the hassle of neighborhood drama. That peaceful existence lasted about 2 years until a new family moved into the 2nd floor, directly below my corner of the building. Within days of their arrival, the problems started. They'd leave bin bags piled up in the lobby instead of taking them to the communal bins outside. The smell would drift up the stairwell on hot days. Their cars would appear in other people's allocated parking spots, forcing residents to park on the street and risk tickets. I called the council twice about the rubbish situation. Both times they assured me someone would look into it. Nothing changed. The weekend parties started about a month after they moved in. Every Friday and Saturday night, without fail, music would start around 9 or 10 and continue past midnight. The other residents on the second floor complained constantly, but the family didn't seem to care. I heard from a woman on the 6th floor that someone had confronted them once and got sworn at for their trouble. My flat was far enough away that the noise was annoying but manageable. I'd stick some cotton wool in my ears and eventually drift off. The people on floors 3 through 5 had it worse. Then came that Friday in July. The music started at 10 o'clock as usual, but something was different this time. The bass was absolutely thunderous. It felt like someone was punching the walls of my flat every few seconds. Pictures rattled on the walls. The bed vibrated. My girlfriend sat up and stared at me with murder in her eyes. I told her they must have bought new speakers. She said she was going to kill them. I offered to go talk to them first. I pulled on some jeans and headed downstairs. The stairwell amplified every bass thump. By the time I reached the second floor, my head was pounding. I knocked on their door and waited. The music was so loud I wasn't sure they'd hear me, so I knocked harder. The door flew open. A man in his 30s stood there holding a can of lager. His eyes were glazed and he swayed slightly. The smell of cigarettes and cheap beer rolled out of the flat behind him. I apologized for bothering him, but explained that the music was really loud tonight. I mentioned it was shaking the furniture in my flat and asked if he'd mind turning it down a bit. He told me to get lost and slammed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, genuinely shocked. I've been polite, I hadn't threatened or insulted him, and that was his response. I went back upstairs and called the non-emergency police number. The operator was sympathetic and promised to send someone round. Being a Friday night, I knew it might take a while. My girlfriend and I sat in the living room because the bedroom was unbearable. About an hour later, I saw a patrol car pull up outside. 2 officers went into the building. A few minutes later, the music dropped to a reasonable level. The police left. 5 minutes after that, the music went back up to full volume. My girlfriend said I had to be joking. I told her I'd call them again. The second call took nearly 2 hours to produce results. The officers who turned up looked tired and irritated. They went in, the music dropped, they left. This time we made it 20 minutes before the volume went back up. It was now 3 in the morning. My girlfriend was beyond angry. She was pacing the flat like a caged animal, talking about ways to make them suffer. I'd never seen her like this before. She taught primary school and had the patience of a saint, but everyone has their limit. I was sitting on the sofa trying to think of a solution when it hit me. A brilliant, devious, completely untraceable solution. I grabbed my toolkit from the cupboard and headed back into the stairwell. First, I went down to the second floor just to confirm which flat number was causing the problem. Then I went up to the 4th floor. Next to the door leading to the 4th floor lobby was a wooden access panel. Behind it sat one of the 2 electrical distribution panels for the building. The panel was secured with a basic square key lock that any decent-sized flathead screwdriver could pop open. I had one in my toolkit. The panel inside contained 20 large 80-amp fuses, one for each flat in the lower half of the building. Each fuse was clearly labeled with the flat number. I found the one I needed immediately. Here's where fate decided to be kind to me. A few weeks earlier, I'd replaced a blown fuse at the theater where I worked. Instead of throwing away the dead fuse, I'd tossed it in my toolkit and forgotten about it. It was exactly the same type and capacity as the ones in this panel. I pulled out the fuse carrier for their flat. The music stopped instantly. The silence was so sudden and complete that it felt like someone had pressed pause on the entire world. I quickly swapped the live fuse for the dead one and pushed the carrier back in. Then I secured the panel, locked the access door, and walked back upstairs. My girlfriend was standing in the doorway of our flat. It was her eyes wide. She asked what I'd done. I told her I'd fixed the problem. She asked how. I told her not to worry about it. We went to bed and slept until noon. It was glorious. Over the next few weeks, I occasionally saw the man from that flat in the building. He always looked exhausted and frustrated. I heard from another resident that they'd had electricians out 3 times trying to figure out why their power kept failing. The fuses kept blowing for no apparent reason. 2 months later, a removal van appeared outside the building. The family was moving out. I later learned that the council had received so many noise complaints about them over the previous 6 months that they'd been forced to relocate them to another property. There's a limit to how many times you can disturb an entire building before things catch up with you. The new family who moved in were quiet as church mice. My girlfriend and I never had another sleepless night in that flat. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.